The Cessna 172 bucked violently as two F-16s screamed past, their jet wash nearly rolling the tiny aircraft. Captain Elena Rodriguez gripped the controls, dark hair whipping in the turbulence, knuckles white against the yoke. Below, Edwards Air Force Base sprawled like a fortress across the California desert. Unidentified aircraft land immediately or face defensive action. Before she could respond, the belly of an F-16 filled her windscreen, close enough to see the pilot's helmet. The message was crystal clear: comply or face the consequences. 20 minutes later, she knelt on the scorching tarmac, hands clasped behind her head, surrounded by armed security personnel. Colonel Marcus Thompson leaned down, his face a mask of authority and barely restrained fury. "What were you thinking? You could have been a threat to national security." Elena remained silent. She didn't even flinch, because they saw a reckless intruder, but they had no idea of the truth. She had designed what they now protected with their lives. And they had. Just handed her the perfect stage. The woman behind the mystery. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, and she appeared utterly unremarkable. Someone you might encounter at a coffee shop without a second thought. 36 years old, with jet black hair pulled into a practical ponytail, she wore a weathered brown leather flight jacket that had seen countless missions. The name patch was so faded you could barely make out Rodriguez, stitched in silver thread. Her dark jeans were functional, her boots well worn, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove to anyone. But observe more carefully, truly observe, and you'd notice the details. The way she moved with military precision despite civilian attire, how her dark brown eyes seemed to catalog every exit, every person, every potential danger without obvious movement, the slight compensation in her left leg, evidence of an old wound that never fully healed. Around her neck, barely visible beneath her collar, hung a simple gold chain with what appeared to be a piece of twisted aluminum. Not decoration, but aircraft debris polished smooth by years of unconscious handling. She lived in solitude in a cabin 30 miles outside Mojave, California, where the desert stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. Her closest neighbor was 9 miles away, which suited her perfectly. The cabin was austere but immaculate, with one notable exception: a wall covered in flight charts. Not current ones, but charts from a decade past, marked with routes and annotations in pencil that had faded but never been completely erased. On the simple oak desk sat a single photograph in a damaged frame, a woman in an Air Force flight. Suit beaming beside an F-22 Raptor, her eyes bright with determination and pride. That woman resembled Elena Rodriguez, but also seemed like a completely different person. That woman hadn't yet discovered that doing what's right could cost you everything that mattered. The interrogation begins. Colonel Thompson was in his element. He'd commanded base security for 4 years, and in that time he'd built a reputation for unwavering discipline and absolute intolerance for breaches. The woman kneeling before him represented exactly the kind of situation he lived for: an opportunity to demonstrate his authority, to show the 300 personnel watching that security was sacred. "You know what I believe?" he said, circling her like a predator stalking prey. "I believe you're either conducting espionage or just another deluded civilian who thinks regulations don't apply to her. Which is it?" Elena remained motionless, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. This apparent defiance seemed to inflame Thompson further. "Answer me when I address you!" He grabbed her shoulder, forcing her to face him. "You think you're special? You think that flying scrap heap gives you pilot credentials?" Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, the air traffic controller who'd vectored in the intercepting F-16s, stepped forward with a smirk. "Sir, she's completely unresponsive. Should I contact psychiatric evaluation?" Santos continued mockingly. "Probably another wannabe aviator who learned from internet tutorials. They all imagine they're heroes until reality strikes." The crowd of personnel chuckled nervously. Some appeared uncomfortable, but none were willing to challenge their superiors openly. Master Sergeant David Clark, head of base security, decided to escalate the humiliation. "Ma'am, I'm searching your aircraft now, and when I discover whatever anti-establishment literature or conspiracy materials you're carrying, we're adding domestic terrorism to your violations." The personal attack, They brought her belongings from the plane in a military duffel bag, dumping them without ceremony on the hot tarmac. Clark rifled through them with theatrical disgust. "Look at this," he announced, holding up the framed photograph. "She's collecting pictures of military aircraft. Probably another stolen Valor case." He carelessly tossed the photo aside, the frame fracturing further on impact. "And what's this supposed to be?" He'd discovered her logbook, filled with meticulous notations of every flight for the past decade. "These flight hours look fabricated. Lady, did you steal this from an actual pilot?" Major Kevin Foster, commander of the F-16 squadron that had intercepted her, strutted over in his flight suit, still wearing his helmet. "My pilots could have eliminated you instantly," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You're fortunate we have protocols about not engaging civilian aircraft, though honestly, sometimes I question if we're too lenient." The degradation escalated systematically, each officer attempting to surpass the last. Santos pulled up Elena's flight plan on her tablet, ridiculing the careful calculations. "Oh, look, she even attempted to file correctly, probably copied it from a legitimate pilot's work." The sun beat down mercilessly, the concrete radiating heat like a furnace. Elena's knees ached against the pavement, her hands growing numb behind her head. But she remained silent, even as Thompson continued his verbal assault about civilians who didn't understand their place. It was Thompson who delivered the most cutting blow. He'd found her wallet, extracting her driver's license with dramatic flair. "Elena Rodriguez, age 36. No military identification, no credentials, nothing. Just another nobody who thought she could play aviator." He turned to the crowd, his voice rising with righteous anger. "You know what infuriates me most? The disrespect. Men and women train for years to earn the privilege to fly in this airspace. They sacrifice, they bleed, they die for that honor. And you," he pointed accusingly at Elena, "you just thought you could waltz in here like you owned the place." The turning point. Clark found her emergency supplies, basic medical equipment, water, signal flares. "Prepared for everything except common sense?" he announced to more nervous laughter. Foster kicked at her aircraft's landing gear. "This relic belongs in a scrapyard, not in the air. How many regulations is she violating just by flying this death trap?" The young personnel laughed uneasily, some looking distinctly uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. Elena could see it in their expressions, the doubt creeping in, the questions about whether this was appropriate. But military discipline kept them silent. Thompson wasn't finished. "This is what happens when civilians forget their place, when they think they're equal to warriors." He gestured at her weathered appearance, her simple clothes. "Look at her. She's nothing, a nobody trying to operate in our world." That's when something shifted in Elena's expression. Not anger, something deeper. Something that had been building for 10 years of silence. 10 years of carrying a burden that would have destroyed lesser souls. She thought of Sophia. Always Sophia. And the drawing that had been clutched in small hands during the accident. A picture of an angel with airplane wings. She thought of 53 children who never got to grow up because someone else had. Followed orders without question. She thought of how she'd been erased from existence, stripped of everything she'd worked for, blamed for having a conscience in a world that rewarded blind obedience. "Colonel Thompson!" Elena finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly across the silent tarmac. "I need to make a phone call." The colonel barked a laugh. "A call? To your attorney? Your family? Sorry, but you're not contacting anyone until—" "To NORAD," Elena continued, still quiet but with steel underneath. "Authentication code, Phoenix Rising 9847. The revelation." The laughter died instantly. Santos went pale, her tablet clattering to the ground. That's an ultra-clearance code," she whispered. "Only 14 people in the entire country possess those codes." Clark's hand froze halfway to his weapon. Foster took an involuntary step backward. Only Thompson, too caught up in his own authority, failed to recognize what had just occurred. "What kind of joke?" "Sir," Santos interrupted, her voice shaking, "those codes, they're legitimate. They're for personnel with knowledge so classified that—" She couldn't complete the sentence. Elena slowly lowered her hands and stood, her movements careful and deliberate. For the first time, she looked Thompson directly in the eye. "Colonel, I've been very patient, but now I need that phone call." Clark was already on his radio, his voice trembling. "Control, we need immediate verification on a Phoenix Rising authentication code." The response was instant and panicked. "All units stand down. Repeat, all units stand down immediately." The truth unveiled. The base's emergency screens used for alerts and briefings suddenly flickered to life. General Rebecca Williams, Air Combat Command's highest-ranking officer, appeared on the screen. Her expression cycled through surprise, recognition, and something that might have been anguish. "My God, Elena Rodriguez!" The silence was deafening. 300 personnel stood frozen, watching their reality crumble. Williams' voice carried across the tarmac, each word dropping like an explosive device. "Colonel Thompson, have you lost your mind? Do you have any idea who you just detained?" Thompson tried to speak, but only managed a hoarse whisper. Williams continued, her voice rising. "That woman designed half the security protocols you claim she violated. She wrote the manual on restricted airspace management." The general caught herself, then continued more carefully. "Colonel Rodriguez has ultra clearance because she possesses knowledge vital to national security, knowledge she's kept silent about for 10 years, despite having every reason to speak. But she's—" Thompson gestured helplessly at Elena's civilian clothes, her battered aircraft. "She's not in the system," Williams said slowly, "because we erased her from it. My predecessor made sure of that when he needed someone to blame for his own catastrophic failure." The full story. The truth began to unfold like a nightmare in reverse, each revelation more devastating than the last. Elena Rodriguez refused to target 53 children in Afghanistan, Williams continued, her voice growing harder with each word. "She was court-martialed for having a conscience, and while she sat in detention for doing the right thing, her 6-year-old daughter died in a car accident." Santos found her voice barely audible. "The Kandahar school incident, that was you. You're the pilot who refused the order." Elena neither confirmed nor denied, simply stood there with quiet dignity despite everything she'd endured. Williams wasn't finished. "And Thompson, that medical supply run she was flying, it's for the Veterans Administration Clinic at 29. Palms, specifically for the trauma unit that treats pilots injured in combat missions. She's been flying those runs without compensation for 9 years. Flying medical supplies to veterans in that aircraft because she believes in service, even after we destroyed her life for it." Foster removed his helmet, his face stricken. "Ma'am, we didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Elena finally spoke, her voice calm and without accusation. "That was the point. The transformation." The weight of realization settled over the assembled personnel like a crushing blanket. They had humiliated a woman who had sacrificed everything rather than compromise her principles. They had mocked someone who continued to serve those who had destroyed her. Clark stepped forward, his hands shaking as he began carefully placing Elena's belongings back in the bag, treating them like sacred relics. When he reached the cracked photograph, he hesitated. "Ma'am, I can have this repaired, please." Elena took it gently, tracing the crack with one finger. "Some things are meant to stay broken, Sergeant. They remind us of the cost of fixing what shouldn't have been broken in the first place." The transformation was complete. The woman they had dismissed as a nobody had revealed herself to be someone whose actions had shaped the very policies they enforced. Someone who had paid the ultimate price for refusing to compromise her conscience. Thompson, the man who had built his career on absolute authority, fell to his knees. "Colonel Rodriguez, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Elena Rodriguez, who had lost everything for refusing to kneel to power, gently touched Thompson's shoulder. "Stand up, Colonel. Kneeling solves nothing. You did your job as you understood it." The lesson. She looked around at the assembled personnel, these young faces who had just learned that sometimes the enemy of protocol is conscience. "You want to honor me? Honor those 53 children by remembering that every order, every mission, every decision has human cost. Remember that rank doesn't determine righteousness. And remember that sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing at all. Santos approached with tears streaming down her face. The children in Afghanistan, did you know? Before the strike? I saw them through my sensors, Elena said simply, playing, learning, being children, just like Sophia was. Her hand went to the metal fragment at her throat. Just like Sophia was. The departure. The F-16 pilots who had forced her down stood in formation, their flight suits dark with perspiration. Foster spoke for them all. Ma'am, we'd like to escort you out. Honor guard formation. It's the least we can do. Elena shook her head. I don't need an escort, Major. I haven't needed one for 10 years. She walked back to her battered Cessna, where ground crew were already frantically trying to remove the word intruder they'd spray-painted on the fuselage. She ran her hand along the aircraft's skin, like greeting an old friend. Besides, and I have medical supplies to deliver. Veterans are waiting. As she performed her pre-flight check, Thompson found the courage to approach one last time. Colonel Rodriguez, what you did in Afghanistan refusing that order, I have to ask, was it worth it? Everything you lost? Elena paused in her inspection, considering. Then she smiled the saddest smile Thompson had ever seen. Colonel, I dream about those 53 children every night, but in my dreams, they're alive. They're playing, learning, growing up. In my dreams, they get to become doctors, teachers, parents. That's worth any price. She climbed into the cockpit, the old leather seat conforming to her shape like a glove. And Sophia knew her mother tried to save them. She knew that, before she died, that's the only medal I need. The legacy. The Cessna's engine coughed to life, settling into its familiar rhythm. As Elena taxied toward the runway, every person on that tarmac, from the newest recruit to Colonel Thompson himself, rendered a perfect salute. She didn't acknowledge it, didn't need to, but those closest could see her lips moving in what might have been a prayer, or might have been 53 names recited like a rosary of regret and resolve. The tower controller, a young woman who had been silent throughout the entire incident, keyed her microphone. Cessna 847, you are cleared for immediate departure. Any heading, any altitude, and ma'am, Phoenix 1, the skies are yours. They always have been. Elena Rodriguez flew west into the setting sun, her battered aircraft carrying medicine to those who needed it, just as she'd done every week for 9 years. Behind her, Edwards Air Force Base slowly returned to normal operations, though nothing would ever be quite the same. Young personnel would tell this story in barracks and ready rooms, each time adding their own understanding of what they'd witnessed. How a woman who'd lost everything chose service over bitterness. How she'd been destroyed for her conscience and still returned to help those who had destroyed her. How real courage sometimes looks like a tired woman in an old airplane, flying medical supplies across the desert, asking for nothing in return. Colonel Thompson stood on the tarmac long after the Cessna disappeared, thinking about the choices that define us, about the difference between following orders and following conscience, about how sometimes the greatest victory comes not from wielding power, but from knowing when not to use it. The ultimate question. Some battles are won not with power but with dignity. Elena Rodriguez had won hers the moment she chose 53 Afghan children over her career, her freedom, her future. She'd won it again every day for 10 years as she flew supplies to veterans while wearing the fragment of her daughter's car seat against her heart, and she'd won it today by refusing to let humiliation turn her into something less than she was. The question that lingered in the desert air, the question that would haunt Colonel Thompson and every witness to that day, was simple. If you were her, carrying all that pain, all that loss, all that injustice, would you forgive? Would you serve those who'd wronged you? Would you choose dignity over revenge? Elena Rodriguez had made her choice 10 years ago in Afghan airspace, and she'd never stop making it. Every flight, every delivery, every silent mile across the desert was her answer. 3 months later, Thompson requested a transfer to a veterans hospital where he spent his remaining years in the Air Force working with wounded warriors. Santos left active duty to become a flight instructor, teaching young pilots that technology must always serve humanity, never the reverse. Foster founded a scholarship program for children of military families who had lost parents in service. They all carried the lesson Elena Rodriguez had taught them, that true strength isn't found in the power to destroy, but in the courage to create, to heal, to serve, even when the world offers you every reason to become something harder, colder, less human. The Cessna continued its weekly flights, a ghost in the desert carrying hope to those who needed it most. And sometimes, on clear days when the sun struck the windscreen just right, ground controllers would swear they could see an angel with airplane wings, reminding them that some battles are won not with weapons, but with the quiet determination to remain human in a world that rewards machinery. In the end, Elena Rodriguez's greatest victory wasn't surviving her fall from grace. It was choosing, every single day, to rise above it. If you were her, would you forgive? The desert knows the answer. It whispers it in every grain of sand, every mile of endless sky. Some people are not broken by injustice. They are refined by it. Elena Rodriguez was one of those people. And in a world that desperately needed heroes who looked like ordinary people doing extraordinary things, she was exactly what we needed, whether we deserved her or not. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.